Good morning, everybody. I have to admit, I'm a little starstruck. These are the top people in language learning and global competency development. There is probably over 50 years of experience across the panel, and I'm very pleased and honored to have you all here with us today. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do is just get started on the panel. You all have their bios, I think, on the website, and you probably know a lot about these speakers here today. So in the interest of time, I thought we'd get started with some questions. So I'd like to ask you each to talk about an experience where learning, or perhaps learning a language or not learning a language, had a profound impact on your life or career. Akash, why don't you go first?
Sure, Neelam. Yeah. As you know, just like you, I'm South Asian American, or just South Asian. I'm just a permanent resident in this country still. I'm going to be a U.S. citizen soon, but I'm so happy to be here, first of all, and so proud that I'm at the Asia Society, not as an engineer, lawyer, or a doctor. As you know, that's the stereotype for a typical, a stereotypical Indian man, that you could be either one of those three or a disgrace to the family. So I came to this country in 2009 to study nuclear engineering at Iowa State. I gave that up, and I became a math teacher in Oklahoma. And while I was a math teacher and backpacking through Central America and South America, I picked up Spanish. And I was like, man, I've gotten certified to become a math teacher. I'm going to take the Spanish test. And I passed it in Oklahoma and Texas. And I was like, who wants to teach numbers when Spanish is so much more fun? This morning I spoke to Verónica. She said 2 words. And I was like, you're from Argentina. We were in that cab, and remember the cab driver? It's like, hey, ¿cómo tú estás? ¿Qué lo que mi mano? And the guy's like, no way. How did you know I was Dominican? But the joy of teaching language is, what brought me to this profession, what drew me there, and it showed me that, language can connect people. Like I connected with Veronica or the cab driver this morning, and that if language can help build bridges, it's the work that Asia Society does, that ACTFL does, that each one of you on this panel does to help build bridges for world peace and collaboration.
Thank you.
So that's my language story.
Thank you.
And I hope that inspires, just in conclusion. Last night I was talking to Michelle Aoki from Washington and Duarte Silva, professor at Stanford, that the amount of, the number of Chinese American, Indian American students on the West Coast committing suicide because of parental and societal pressure that you have to be engineers, lawyers, or doctors. Today, my parents don't think I'm a disgrace to the family. They go and advocate for every South Asian American or Asian American parents that, hey, you could be a plumber, you could be a carpenter, you could be a teacher, but be the best one out there.
Okay. Thank you. Richard, how about you?
Mine is pretty straightforward. I spent 5 years in a monastery and I learned Latin, ancient Greek, and German, and French. And it taught me what that was about is if you want to have a public voice, you must be literate. And that's a real path to literacy. My second exposure was life and death happens when you're in the military and you're in Berlin when the wall goes up and you're in intelligence and tanks are 500 meters separating from each other, closest to the war we've ever been, including Cuba. Language matters. Language matters. And the third is my wife, Christine, who taught me to enjoy every part of it. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, okay, great. Veronica, how about you?
That's great. So I must say how impressed I am by your Argentinian dialect, or as well as your Dominican. So for me, language is at the essence of what is my identity, I think, and why I became an educator to begin with. When I was a kid, I was in love with languages and studied French and German and English later on, and Portuguese outside of school. But what was really interesting is that I lived in Brazil when I was 20, and the job that I had, because I knew some English, was to teach English. And what was phenomenal about that experience, which is why I'm an educator today, is because I was lucky enough to teach English in a program that designed by a Canadian, very progressive anthropologist who had spent some time in the Amazon. And she was of the idea that children in Brazil should learn English not only to learn to admire the Buckingham Palace or New York City, but really because it mattered that they learned English to tell the story of the Amazon, to tell the story of Brazil, to tell the story of the Southern Hemisphere. So all of a sudden for me, the act of learning the verb to be became an entirely different enterprise. So it was about really understanding the world, understanding justice and justice, understanding the very grand purpose of what we do day in and day out in our classrooms. And the rest of it is history, as we say.
Beautiful story, thank you. Tony.
Well, language had a very profound influence on my life, learning a language, but not in the way you might expect. It was a long time ago, 1970s, when I was in high school. And at that time, this is in Los Angeles, the high schools were predominantly, rather segregated by both race and class. And so my parents wanted me to go to a school that was in a different part of town because the schools are that much better. As you imagine, they were in the wider, wealthier parts of town versus the schools were in my less wealthy BIPOC part of town. So the only way that you could, there was no choice programs back then, so the only way you could go to a school that was out of your district is if you took a course at the school that wasn't offered at your home school. So I had two choices. I could take ornamental horticulture or Russian. I had no idea what ornamental horticulture was. Still don't, so I took Russian. And so for 3 years I dutifully studied Russian in school, and it was my gateway basically to be able to go to this school in a better neighborhood or better quality school. And as it happened, there was also a whole bunch of other kids on this sort of voluntary busing program, other black kids who were taking Russian to do the same thing. And so you had a curious phenomenon at that school where the two courses that were predominantly black were Russian and the basketball team, which is very bizarre. And so I did well in Russian, and I did well in school generally, and it really was, though, an experience of cross-cultural learning. I didn't go across the ocean, I went across town, but it was very, very different. And so it really was my first opportunity to kind of become immersed in a different culture. And I learned several things from that experience. One was, because I did relatively well in school, I learned that I could compete and thrive within this environment where, frankly, it wasn't necessarily expected that I could. And so I was able, from a very young age, to sort of counter the narrative that black kids aren't intellectually gifted. I could look to myself, my colleagues, my friends, and that was a lie. And so that taught us something very deep, and it helped me become a competent learner and helped me become a competent person as we went forward. Another thing it taught me is that you can become friends with and learn to love people from a different culture, despite the fact they're very different from you are. The four guys who I loved most in the world were my four best friends in high school. They're my four best friends right now, 50 years later. The last thing I learned, though, was that inequity in education is very real, is very, very much a fact. And I learned, too, that using a language or anything like any course like that as a sort of gatekeeper to being able to go to a better school was really wrong. I mean, I was there for the wrong reason. And so it taught me that basically, it instilled in me this notion that I've got to do something about creating equal access to high quality education. And that's essentially what I have done my entire life. That's my career. And so to a very real extent, having to take Russian, enjoying it while I was there, but having to take it led me to this life that I lead now as a person who's been working for equal education all my life. So that's my story.
And thank you for all of your stories. Very inspiring. And if you notice, none of the stories had, well, I wanted to pass an AP test, or I needed it for a college, entrance. That's not really, that was never the goal. And so I think that's really, these are important messages.
Молодец.
Yeah.
Okay, so now Tony and Veronica, you just co-authored and published a new book, Educating for Global Competence, Preparing Our Students to Engage the World. There's a second edition, very highly anticipated, and it is available at the bookstore if you're interested in grabbing a copy. So congratulations on that.
Not that I'm selling it or anything.
Oh, yeah. He has it here too.
I will sign your book if you buy it.
Yeah. What are some key takeaways from your research and findings in preparing this book, and what would you like to share with us today?
Go behind.
Yeah. I think that for me, sort of the 10 years that happened, the world changed so much between the first version of this book and today. I think that in the beginning we thought, globalization was really moving us into a sort of greater intercultural dialogue, greater intercultural, collaborations, and we see that the rise of nationalisms, the rise of xenophobia, the rise is really shifting the conversation. So, to me, one of the biggest sort of ahas has been how much our idea of the child and our ideas and narratives that we have about society shape what we do in the classrooms, the policies we choose, and so forth. So I think that for a long time, we have been driving education, primarily in the United States, with an idea of the child as the future worker. So the child for the job. So this means that we needed to figure out what jobs were necessary and fit the life of the child, preparing them for fitting sort of the needs of a market that needed these children. Now, and therefore we ask, HR, individuals, what is needed, for businesses. And this is written within sort of a narrative about society that has to do with, with a very sort of neoliberal notion of, markets drive our decisions in societies. There's an infinite growth, economic growth that will be better for everybody, and we need to place this child in this narrative. And I think that over time we have learned, at least for me, sort of come to think of the child. I've come to really sort of very explicitly question these assumptions and really try to push for us to be thinking about the child as a whole human being with social, emotional capacities, needs, with values, with ethics, civics, and a child that is inscribed within a narrative of a society or societies that are seeking to figure out how this project of democracy works. Seeking to figure out how to live together on a planet of finite resources. So that places our job in education in a different place. And I think that this book is trying to speak to that vision of a more comprehensive view of children and learners, right, and a more comprehensive view, a more, I would say, a better view of societies.
Thank you. Tony, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think Veronica hit it on the head. When we wrote the first version of the book, there was people were leaning into the notion of globalism, and now there's been a real backlash to the point where, teaching to be a global citizen, I'm sure at some point this book is going to be banned in some states for teaching woke concepts. And I think what we've discovered is that, to my mind, I come from a political background as well. There are a lot of folks now who in power who are scared, who are very scared about the changes that are going around them. And they're very interested in sort of resisting that change. They're trying to sort of keep the status quo as it is. And I think the thing that they're most afraid of changing is their minds, or particularly kind of their mindset as to how the world is and should be. So I'm going to ask if you will indulge me. I'm going to read a little bit from the book that kind of speaks to this, because I think it says what I want to say better than I can say it contemporaneously, and since I wrote it, I'll say it. Actually, Veronica and I wrote all this together, so I shouldn't say I wrote it. It was both of us together. But anyway, one point is clear. Enduring shifts in education rarely emerge from peace and prosperity. Much to the contrary, they typically represent visionary education responses to historical moments of reckoning. In considering paradigmatic shifts, evolution provides a useful lens. From an evolutionary perspective, species adapt or perish. For humans, the locus of accountability and adaptability has shifted over time from physical capacities to mental capacities. Put simply, nowadays human survival depends on how we act based on how we think. And this evolutionary fact places the education of our young people at center stage in ensuring cultural and environmental survival. And how do we humans think, in fact? Well, there are two competing worldviews here. The dominance paradigm assumes that in the natural order of things there are winners and losers. Some people are stronger, smarter, faster, or more capable of achieving hegemony over others. And in this dominance paradigm, it is legitimate for them to do so. It's just the way things are and the ways things have always been. The competing worldview, the egalitarian paradigm, recognizes that people and societies differ in profound ways, but that these differences do not require or legitimate the dominance of one person over another, or one group over another. Within the egalitarian paradigm, we consider others as being on the same level as ourselves and equally deserving of this which enables anyone to survive and thrive. So educating for global competence means that we must educate all youth to develop the more egalitarian mindset. If we are to root out racism and survive as a species, education in the United States and on a global scale must develop in youth the disposition to act more towards the common good than toward individual gain or group hegemony. So I think that's what sticks out to me now, is that this notion of developing in young people the capacity to see each other as equals and collaborate across cultures in ways that don't require one to dominate another, that's really the key to us as a species surviving. And so that's what I wanted to bring to us today, is that's what shifted for me really in understanding why global competence is so critical right now.
Great, thank you. And for those of you that don't know, Tony Jackson was a Vice President of Education here at Asia Society for 16 years? 17 years. My former boss as well. And so when I joined Asia Society, it was pretty much the first time I really learned about this concept of global competence. And I read your first book. And that has, there's a framework around it, very simple. And it's basically you want students to recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, investigate the world, and take action. And so those four things, yes, I remember. Those four, that framework, I think, has helped guided me, even as a parent, as a curriculum developer, to really kind of think about those four aspects, to develop content and to help my kids kind of navigate the world. So it's been a really great experience for me to learn about all of this. And I do encourage all of you to learn a little bit more about it and grab the book if you can. So thank you both very much.
Sure.
Okay, so Akash, congratulations on being named the new president of ACTFL. Very well deserved. Can you share a little bit about how ACTFL views global competencies and why this is an important aspect of the work for you and your colleagues?
Thank you, Neelam. Just a great conversation, Veronica, Tony, and Neelam, that dives me into the idea of differences. That what we see in our planet today is this conflict, the war, and everything that's going on is because of indifference. If somebody says, Akash, I don't like the color of your skin, I don't like your accent, I don't like this person's sexual orientation, or I don't like the way this person views this particular topic. So ACTFL, as a national organization of over 12,000 members strong of language educators, I just recently, just 8 weeks ago, I was in the General Assembly of the United Nations, and they asked me to speak about how is the work that language educators do promoting cross-cultural understanding and peace building and conflict resolution. I said what my colleagues in this room here and those who are joining us live today and the 12,000 plus members in this country, every single day, no matter what language we teach, we're teaching young children to appreciate the many differences of others. To see that we have a lot more in common than we are different. And when young children and adults alike can see that we have a lot more in common than we are different, it's a game changer in conflict resolution and peace building. So you guys are leading the work of inspiring the global citizen solutionaries of tomorrow. You guys are doing the work of preventing the next world war, or producing the next hate monger that's going to go cause a shooting in some part of this country. So the work that we do is so critical. And thank you for that conversation that both of you have led me into the work that we do at ACTFL, which is we represent these 12,000 teachers that are doing the much needed work of conflict resolution and peace building every single day in their classrooms.
Thank you for that. So for those of you who are language educators and you have not had the honor to meet or to learn about Dr. Richard Brecht, here he is. And please know that he has shaped the modern language education in the United States. And it would not be the same if he weren't involved in it. So Dr. Brecht, Where do you see the state of language and global competency learning currently in the United States, and what advice would you give to teachers in our audience regarding endurance and impact?
Thank you, Neelam. I have to tell you that it's a real pleasure to be in a society's location and with an audience that respects old age and basically tolerates it. And so you know, I've been in the business alone since 1965. So add up your years and it gets better. But I'd like to give it a little overview, a general overview, because I think it's important. By the way, Russian was my language in Berlin, just so you know. Global competency. Language has to tie global competency to all of these issues, existential issues threatening our whole existence, not only abroad, but at home. Racism abroad, racism at home, poverty abroad, poverty at home, climate change, go to Miami or go to New York City, climate change at home. And so all of these things, and what they're causing are migrations that are changing the composition of our societies, what's called now super diverse societies. What a challenge for language and for culture coming in this world. I want to make one other point before I go quickly to language, that recent literature, if you read Foreign Affairs, they say you cannot advocate liberal democracy unless you practice it at home. Liberal democracy, access, and equality. And so this notion of global competence, I love it, it's absolutely right, but it's just as relevant at home domestically. Let me make some point with regard to language. Right now, what's our greatest threat? Our enrollments in language education now, K through 16, are exactly the same as they were in the 70s. A half a century. And it's still 8%, 7 or 8% in university and about 20% in K-12. And by the way, that's only exposure. That's not expertise, by the way. So that's a threat. And the other threat is, okay, we'll just do AI. I got news for all of you. No, it's not news. So those are the threats, the opportunity. The opportunity right now, and we've just finished a project with Mellon support called America's Languages. And this is all about every one of our languages, whether they're indigenous or immigrant, refugee, whether they're the urban poor studying foreign languages, or whether they're sign language in the Indian Plains sign language, or whether they're or whether they're all of our languages. These are all our languages. They're not foreign, they're not indigenous, they're America's languages. And what we're trying to say is, in this project, is that the problem is, the reason we have the enrollments we have is we've decided, or we've neglected all of the underserved languages in this country. The heritage languages, Joy, God bless you, are waiting to learn. They're more motivated to learn their languages than anyone else. The people in the rural areas who might never enjoy the benefits of language, the cognitive, the educational, and the employment benefits, and 1 year of Spanish satisfies the language requirements for this district. That's unfair. These are social justice sins that we have to correct. We have now to understand that language education is a social justice issue. It's about equality. All of the benefits that data show now in language education, whether it's for children and their education, whether they learn English better, by the way, and whether they're old, whether they're experienced, and all of a sudden, if you study a language when you're older, there is evidence that your manifestations of cognitive decline are lessened. Okay? Think about this. This is why I'm here, because cognitive decline is the challenge. So the idea now is to say that these are the motivations. It's a new rationale. It's not only global citizenship in dealing with migrations, in dealing with social change and climate change and so on. These are the same issues we face at home. And racism is the same issue we face at home. And what we're trying to say in all of this, if you want to change the enrollments in the United States, and you think that's important, then it's good to teach about racism in our classrooms, but it's better to bring races into our classrooms. And so if you want to make a change, and here's my challenge to all the teachers and everything, it's hard. Why are the enrollments the same? Because it's hard to attract people. But you know, we're not looking at the people, we're looking at too many privileged people who look like me. We need privileged, unprivileged people who look like these, okay? And that's what's happening now in the United States. So what we need is a focus now at the grassroots level, focusing on looking around and seeing where the learners are who aren't in our classrooms, and trying to find a way to reach out to them. And by the way, reach out to their parents. You want to get I don't have to tell you, you want to get a student in your classroom? Talk to the parents about the threats that they feel their children are going to be exposed to in this world, and not only global climate. And so they're not going to have the educational advantage. They're not going to have all of these benefits. They're not going to be able to think clearly anymore because we're overwhelmed by social media. Tell the parents, you want to talk about the future of your children's health and well-being. We can talk about organic foods, or we can talk about language. That's what I would argue for our teachers. It's an integrated and responsive system, but you are the ones who are going to have to work harder than ever to reach across these divides.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm actually surprised to learn that enrollment hasn't gone up since the 70s for language.
It's exactly the same as it was in the 70s.
That's a little disturbing, yes.
Isn't it?
A friend of mine, her niece lives in Pittsburgh, and she was telling me that it's not even a requirement, it's an elective, taking a language.
It is elective.
So it seems it does, maybe it is
for most
going
places,
backwards.
yeah.
That's unfortunate. Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, so a question for all of you. What are some tips you have for incorporating more action around global competency learning into the language classroom? And Veronica, I want to start with you.
Actually, what I have to say builds exactly on what I think is incredibly important, the point that you just made that is incredibly important. And it is, guess how many children we have students we have in our public school systems who are immigrant origin? What would be the percentage, would you guess, that have at least one parent who is an immigrant?
Anybody want to guess?
What?
Shout it out.
42%?
42.
You live in LA, right? Or New York City. So nationally, it is about 27. So 27% of our kids are immigrant origin kids, which means that the majority of these kids have a language that is not English in their homes. Right. Now, the majority of these kids are straddling between cultures. You know, they're straddling between languages, they're straddling between the barrio and the school, they're straddling between, and this straddling between cultures, among languages, in different environments, very much in the spirit that you were describing, Tony, is, I think that in my opinion, it's the capacity of the future. Because the diverse societies that you were describing earlier require that we straddle. And straddling has incredibly important cognitive benefits and social-emotional benefits for kids. It's about belonging to different places. It's about being able to participate in different discursive communities. It is about being able to adjust the ways in which we communicate to communicate with the friends in the hood and the academic context of schooling. And yet that straddling is invisible in schools today. We have this commitment to monolingualism and monoculturalism and homogeneity in our schools that is very dominant. So it makes the complexity and the richness of our kids invisible. So my point regarding action is that I think that if we were to be able to see sort of the local needs in terms of ranging from translations in the hospitals, the capacity to accompany elderly people to vote. There's so many local immediate needs for multiple languages in our societies, and there's so many capacities that our children already have, and so many heritage language kids who could benefit from even deepening in a very useful way sort of their commitment and their capacity to express and communicate in the language of the families. That's quite around us. It's a question of seeing it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Akash, how about you?
Sure. See, one of the reasons why I became ACTFL president is in 2018 I had to live through a personal tragedy. My only sibling, a 26-year-old man, Akash Patel, died in a plane crash in Arizona. So while I was teaching in school, and that really made me think about what can I do to honor my brother's memory. So in 2018, with the help of my scholars at a turnaround school in inner city Dallas, I created what's called the Happy World Foundation. Today in 2023, we have a database of over 2,000 volunteers from 150 countries that video call over 1 million kids across the United States at no cost, so that children can have opportunities to meet a speaker of Chinese in Hong Kong, or in Taiwan, or in India, or maybe in Antarctica that's doing research about climate change, and showing them around Antarctica and maybe taking selfies with penguins. So one of the blessings of COVID-19 is that teachers no longer can say I'm not tech savvy. If my grandmother can call me on WhatsApp video calling, hey, I don't have an excuse to not use Skype or Zoom or Microsoft Teams and be like, I'm going to connect my classroom with my neighbor's son in China or in Taiwan or in some other part of the globe. And that's one way you can help build those bridges and give children the authentic opportunities to connect with people from all around the globe. And if you want one of our volunteers to sign up to come and speak for 20 minutes of a mystery hangout where they've got to ask questions in target language to solve the mystery of where this person's from, go to happyworldfoundation.us and we'll pair you with a volunteer at no cost. Or you could sign up to be a volunteer, a call for action.
Great, thank you. That's a great resource. Thanks a lot. Tony, how about you?
Well, I kind of took the question a bit more literally, because I was thinking, well, so how can language and learning a language instruction be a way in which you actually advance global competence? And I think, if you look at the 4 capacities of global competence that we speak about, I think there's a role for language learning in each one of those. For example, as Neelam said, one of the things that, one of the spheres of global competence is investigating the world, teaching young people to be able to investigate the world. And one of the things that we say is that we want young people to be able to learn from original sources. And when it comes to text written outside of English, what better way to actually be able to get right next to what the author or the observer of a phenomenon said in their language is to be able to speak that language. So it provides a means by which you can actually go to the source, as it were, and not have it be translated, which always in some way or another involves an interpretation. So that's one of the ways in which language makes a big difference. Certainly to develop the capacity to see from different perspectives, especially if you speak 1 or 2 or more languages, it is almost built into the thinking process that if you can name and think about a phenomenon from 2 different perspectives, 2 different languages, it automatically gives you the sense of being able to see things from different perspectives. It brings with it, because language is thinking, and language is ways of viewing the world, and so that lends right into the idea of developing perspective. And of course, language learning is all about communication, and what better way to help young people think about how you accommodate what you're saying to those who you're speaking to have their experience and their world in mind as you speak to them, is thinking about the language they're speaking and what that means for their background, what that means for their experience. And then finally, certainly, I think learning another language provides just a broad wealth of possibilities in terms of collaborating with other people around the world. And certainly this can happen at a young age. It is really imperative, as I said earlier, that we begin to have young people have the experience of taking action collaboratively. And what better way to foster that is through being able to speak others' languages. So I think as a tool to develop global competence, language learning is incredibly important.
Thank you. Thanks. Richard?
let me be very, by the way, americaslanguages.org. Go there, write me, americaslanguages.org. Now let me answer the question. Action into the classroom, it's not action, it's interaction. One, global issues, languages across the curriculum used to be something that was very broad in our system. It's a great idea because all these big issues of climate and racism and everything else can be addressed there. Secondly, the diaspora. China has the largest diaspora in the world. They are all over the world, and interactions, you can always find someone to talk to and with in Chinese. Heritage communities, that's where it comes from. The communities, the partnerships with the communities, helping them form partnerships with the grade school, with the schools and so on. And these are interactions. And finally, the most important thing in my view is understanding that immersion is absolutely necessary to learn language, and an interaction can be locally, it can be domestically, it can be globally, but just look around the corner. Look at the heritage community. Go to Monterey in California, and you'll find out what. Never mind. You know what. Interaction.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes.
Let me build on that a second. One of the things that I think I have found super productive in working with teachers has been working with teachers, say in New York or in DC, by which we begin by having a map of the city and inviting teachers to interview one another about what is your city. So there's a physical map, but then there's the cultural map, then personal map. So drawing together through interviews in this map, so we get to understand each other, we get to understand, what's your supermarket, where do you go, where do you live, where do you take your children to school. And then the question is, where do you find the world in your city? And there's the same map, but then it's like, it's this restaurant, it's this community, it's this friend. And I think that for us, this 1 hour investigation of our cities and the world in our cities has been an awareness moment, sort of a mind-changing moment for the teachers with whom we work. That has been incredibly consequential for how we get to see that the world is around us in the very spirit that you were just describing. Simple.
Yeah, simple. I love it.
No problem.
Okay, so we are obviously at the National Chinese Language Conference. So let's take a moment to focus a little bit on Chinese language and cultural education. Are there tools or lessons you can share with our audience to help them to fortify and grow their programs in a new political landscape? So, anybody want to take on this question? Yeah, sure. Okay, and then I'll go.
Well, he beat me to that.
Okay, you can go first, Richard.
There are two books that just have come out that just boggles my mind. It's Maxine Hong Kingston, The Woman Warrior, China, Men, Tripmaster, Monkey, Hawaii's, and One Summer, Other Writings. It is an incredible picture of the journey of a Chinese woman in the United States. And it is so, and these stories, is another one, Memory Speaks, by Julia Sidevi, which is a Russian. And these books show what what are the lives of bilinguals, and particularly the lives in the former case of a Chinese bilingual in this society, and all the things, all the struggles, and all the challenges. And I believe very much that if we're stories we remember. Stop these statistics, Brett. Stories remember. These are the stories I think we want parents to read. So as teachers, we need to read them, and there are many more. And we want parents to read them, because if you see yourself and your children experiencing this, believe me, I was so moved, never mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Akash.
Well, Neelam, I want to credit Ying Jin. Is she in this room? Ying Jin is our former National Language Teacher of the Year at ACTFL, and she teaches Chinese and California. So Ying is right there, and I want to credit her for a part of this that I'm going to allude to our conversation we had after dinner last night. The first thing we need to do is we need to change the perceptions of China and the Chinese language. Because the first perception that she told me, because I don't speak Chinese, or I don't have any background in Chinese, but she says a lot of people think Chinese is a hard or difficult language. Yes. But she says, Akash, there's no conjugations in Chinese. It should be one of the easiest ones to learn and that you should be drawn to learn. But a lot of the, these notions of geopolitical reasons that you're referring to and why the Confucius Institute went down because of Congress's suspicions of the same, we need to start by changing perceptions of China, perceptions of the language. And then we need to advocate for language choice. In this country, if you see, majority of the foreign language programs are dominated by Spanish and French. We need to advocate for language choice. The student should be able to learn the language they want to learn, or that they're drawn to learn, not just because they're put into a Spanish classroom. I was in Dallas, Texas, at the school I taught. I was the only language teacher on the campus, teaching Spanish and discovering languages. So we need to advocate for language choice. And then lastly, my conversation with Michelle Aoki, a leader from Washington, and the work that ACTFL is doing right now is that we can advocate with the Joint National Committee on Languages for increased funding to bridge those funding gaps because of the Confucius Institute now gone. So we need to find the funding to fund these programs, and then we need to remove barriers to teacher certification, to certify teachers in Mandarin Chinese. Teacher certification is a state issue in the United States. And there's lots of barriers to that. Being an immigrant myself, and knowing that a lot of the teachers in this room that came to this country on an H-1B or a J-1 visa, ACTFL and other national organizations can advocate for removing some of the barriers to the whole immigration situation, or removing barriers to testing. Just because they can't take this test doesn't mean they're not proficient enough to teach this language to the students. Right. So we need to increase access to those more opportunities to expand the learning and teaching of Chinese in this country.
Great, thank you.
Akash, let me add one thing. Mandarin, languages are classified by the government in 4 categories. Spoken Mandarin is category 2. It's like German. The only reason it's category 4 is because you learn 2 languages when you learn Mandarin, okay? And the written language and so on. So the speaking is accessible.
Yes.
It's the reading. I don't have to tell these.
Yeah. So we only have about 5 minutes left, and I want to address or conclude this conversation with a look toward the future of language education. So, as mentioned earlier in this panel already, as we know, artificial intelligence, AI, will significantly impact the field of language instruction and acquisition. How can AI be integrated into language teaching methodologies, and what are the benefits and limitations of such integration? What do you think the future of language education will be like in the world where AI will be widely accessible? Anyone want to take that question? I think it's a question that everyone's kind of wondering about, right?
I don't mind getting, because I was in the classroom, and look, AI is here. We can't deny the fact that it is here. So my take on it, based on my conversation with experts across the country through my travels, you've got to embrace it. It's not going to replace teachers. It is not going to replace your foreign language program, but it's going to make your life a lot easier. All the time you spend grading the work and checking on progress, if a machine can do that, let it do it. While you focus on building relationships with your students. What matters the most in a classroom is you've got to make sure that your child feels a sense of belonging, that they feel valued in the classroom, and they're going to be learning. They're going to be, hey, you got the light bulbs on? They're going to be learning. Absolutely. Let the machine do the job that you were spending tens and hundreds of hours doing. Right. And the other thing I found out last night with Duarte and Michelle is that virtual reality and AI together are game changers. They can create immersive language experiences for your students, where students don't have to travel to China. They don't have to travel to Spain or Argentina. It could create an environment where the teacher becomes the facilitator, the one who's building relationships. Because our students are going through lots of hardships today. They need somebody who cares for them, who tells them, hey, you belong in this classroom. Right. Your background matters. Your identity matters. And that's going to be our job and our role, and let the machines do the hard work.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. Great. Thank you.
I'll build on that, because you've got it exactly right. I mean, I was thinking about the fact that I'm a psychologist actually by training, and a great psychiatrist actually, James Comer, used to talk about the fact that we have to think about not only how students learn, but why they learn. And to a large extent, students learn because they're in a relationship with somebody who cares about whether or not they learn or not. And the fact of the matter is, AI doesn't care about you. It's not that it doesn't like you, it's that it can't care about you, or it can say the words and sort of emulate the nuances of caring, but it really can't care because it doesn't have a heart. There's no heart there. And so it really makes a difference that a human being can engage with another human being and show that they care, show the positive emotional response to their learning. We as infants learn to make eye contact with our parents and smile because we learn to elicit that positive response. In effect, you could say we learn because it elicits love, and love feels good. And so it sounds like sort of touchy-feely, but that's what teaching is a large part of. It's about showing you care about whether or not this human being actually is going to learn what they need to learn because you care that they do. So AI can't do that, never will. It can emulate it, but it never will be that thing that you are, which is a person.
Can I just make one point in this? My daughter and I have a company called Genie.com. It's an interpretation company. Yeah. AI is a threat to interpretation and healthcare and social justice in healthcare. But you want to know something? Right now, the hospitals like Mass General will not use AI. They must have human interactions. Okay, and that's the whole point. When healthcare is at stake or money's at stake, nobody in AI or MT wants to touch it. And so the evidence now in healthcare and among the great hospitals in this country and healthcare systems is it's about human-to-human interaction is the only way we will avoid suits and high budgets.
Thank you.
I think just to add to the conversation, I think that AI, very much like the internet, very much like fake news and so forth, will demand that we incorporate through education a very strong, for lack of a better word, epistemological take. So we need to be able to help to understand ourselves and help our kids understand what is behind the construction of a text, what is behind the construction of a claim, right? So one thing is to say that we humans, walked around this earth for the last 170 million years, or another thing is to say yellow is in fashion. Those are two claims, and they have entirely different roots. Right, so I think that the idea of having a sense of how to interpret claims, the text produced by AI, the information and the news on the internet, I think that it's a capacity we'll need to develop much more.
Thank you. Right, wonderful. Thank you all for your insights on all these subjects. We really appreciate your time today. So grateful for your dedication to the field. And I just want to give them all a final round of applause.